Hello and welcome back to Unity tutorial on dialogue system, or creating a custom dialogue system for your game. Uh, so in this tutorial, I'm going to walk you through how to build the UI, uh, set up the canvas so that we can trigger it, turn it on, have a text field, and have our answer panel all lined up and ready to go. So we can input stuff into it and build the state machine in a minute. So the first thing we want to do is create a UI canvas. A canvas is the central part of any user interface. If you want to do a heads-up display or any menus, anything you want to show that's outside of the game environment that you just want to show to the player goes onto what's called a canvas. And the easiest way to see this is to click this little 2D button up at the top of the scenes window and then zoom way out because a canvas is huge. Alright, so one of the tricks I'm going to do here to keep it looking pretty in our game, see, in our game window we have an aspect ratio, and if we put the game window next to the scene, we can see that it changed the size of this canvas. And then if I size it up, you can see this canvas changing. If I actually make it a different window, you can see that a little more clear, that this is changing the size of that canvas as I change this aspect ratio here. Now I can lock the aspect ratio to like a standard widescreen, which would be 1920 by 1080. And I can just lock it to that resolution, so no matter what, it'll always be that resolution. But oftentimes, that makes a lot of wonky canvas stuff as you go through making more and more assets that are different sizes on your canvas and different menus and things. And as you output on different size monitors, you can have some issues. So one of the tricks I like to do is I'll leave my game here in widescreen just because it's easier. But then on my canvas item, I have a canvas scaler script. So I want to scale this to scale with screen size. Now what this does is no matter what the screen size is, I'm going to make sure that this canvas has the same resolution of 1920 by 1080. So if you're running on a screen that's only 720 and it's running interlace to try to fake this 1920 by 1080, then it's not going to make my canvas double in size and make my dialogue take up the entire screen and make it all look ridiculous. So canvas scaler is one way around that. If you set up both of those things in your game, you lock this aspect ratio, and then you set this reference resolution to the same as this aspect ratio, then you'll notice no matter what the screen size is, if we pull our game window back out, we can see that changing this doesn't change the canvas size. No matter how much I scale it down, scale it up, or make it weird shapes or whatever, doesn't matter as long as it's set up already. So that's one handy little trick. I like to throw those in as often as I can. So that's canvas. Now, as a child object to the canvas, we're going to want to create a panel. Now, this panel we're going to call the dialog panel for simplicity's sake. And the dialog panel, we're going to turn the alpha all the way down so that we don't see it at all. So it's just sort of there. Just kind of a placeholder. What we're going to do is we're going to toggle this dialog panel on and off as we want to make the text item and the answer panel, we want to make those show up. So we're going to toggle this whole panel on to do everything all at once instead of in a bunch of smaller steps. So next, we want to create our text field, which is going to go on the bottom of our screen. When you're using a canvas item, it creates what's called rect transforms for your UI. So this UI space is only in 2 dimensions, right? It's never going to have any depth. So there's not really a point in setting it as a vector 3 position in the game world. And you also want to move it with the camera. So this is kind of Unity's better way of doing it than just a parent or an object that's a child to the camera that sort of like shows up in front of it. This is like a better solution, and it uses what's called anchors. And you'll notice by default we have this tiny little text box in the middle, and it's just anchored at 0.5, 0.5, 0.5, 0.5. So it's exactly centered, and then it builds the text box around it. Now, like I was just talking about with the canvas scaler and the game aspect, as you change monitor sizes, this stuff all gets wonky because its width and height is set in a specific number of pixels. So I have 160 pixels wide, and yeah, the canvas is going to do the best it can to try to scale around that and make it look the same every time. But since it's a constant set of pixels, if I was running on a monitor that was 720p instead of 1080p, then this 160 pixels is going to cover twice as much of the screen. So it would actually be this big. And as we set things up, we're going to set up our text to be like best fit, and we're going to set the minimum size to be small and the max size to be really big. So it'll make use as much of that space as possible. So when I double this width, and I double the height because my aspect ratio is doubled, then I'm going to end up with this text that takes up twice as much space in my screen as I wanted it to. And I don't want it to do that. In this implementation, I don't want it to do that. I want the dialogue system to be a set percentage of the screen so that I can still see the player, I can still see the NPC, I can still move around intuitively, and not be blocked by a dialogue system or have a bunch of text objects that are overlapping each other because they're trying to smash all into one little area. So I'm going to show you how to set this up more properly. The way we do that is using these anchors. So I'm going to start off by spreading it as wide as possible, so the x from 0 to 1, and then my min y is going to be 0, so I'm going to all the way on the bottom, and we're going to do like a 0.25. Should work. Alright, and you notice that these anchors moved, like these little arrows here are the anchors, and they moved, but my text object is still here. And the reason is because Unity, for whatever reason, thinks it's a good idea to just move things around like this. I'm like, oh yeah, it's anchored over here, but I want it over here. And you'll notice that this rect transform up here is changing these numbers. And you can see them show up in the little lines here. You can see how far they are away from the top and the bottom anchors and the side anchors. And it's all measured in exact pixels, which brings out the same problem that I was just talking about with scaling your screen, and these pixel numbers will change as your screen size changes, your aspect ratio changes, and you really just don't want anything to be set as a certain number of pixels at the end of the day. So what we're going to do is we're going to make all of these 0. So that means my text box is now lined up to my anchors, wherever my anchors are. My anchors are always 25% of the height of the screen, but the full width. So it's always going to be here, and always in the same way, and it's always going to look nice, at least to an extent. So we're still going to use the best fit text. Probably don't want to gap that big. 50 looks nice, so I'm probably going to put it down to like 35. You have to change the actual font size to be in inside of that thing, because here's your default font size here, 35. I had to change this from 14 to 35 so that I can make the minimum 35. Yeah, that way by default it's showing that size, and I've got a little bit of play if I have a small amount of text or a large amount of text. You can mess with this depending on how long of a dialogue you want to have in each system and what looks good in your game or whatever your aspect ratio is. All these numbers are subject to change. This is how they're set up for this example. So here we have our text. I'm just going to grab, old school way, I'm going to grab some lorem ipsum. Which, if you haven't used this before, lorem ipsum is just dummy text. It's nothing. It's a bunch of stuff in Latin that looks kind of like text would in English, without actually saying anything, distracting you by making you read something. Instead, it's completely illegible, but gives you an idea of what text is going to look like. It's on average the right number of letters and all that jazz. So here we have our text item. Now, how did I do this before? Actually, I'm gonna do this a little differently real quick. Change one thing. I'm gonna change my dialog panel here, the parent object to the text itself, because I kind of did this differently before, and it kind of makes more sense this way. So if we take the dialog panel and we're going to change its anchors, we're just going to change the y here to a 0.25 to be that same size that that text was. Now the text is a child to, oh yeah, I gotta change this. Now the text is a child to the dialog panel. You notice that it just screwed up all of my text. And that's because the anchors for the dialog panel here are a proportion of the canvas itself, its parent object. So my anchors are telling it 0.25 on the y, so I want 25% up, but all the way wide. So that's where we have this box. And then the text object is still set up at 0.25 of the height of its parent object, which is now the dialog panel, right, which is not the same size as the canvas. So we would just want to change this y value to so what we need to do is change this y value to 1, and we're going to change this rect transform back to 0, and voila, now it all looks pretty. And the reason I did that is because now this dialog panel has an image script on it that we turn the alpha all the way down, but you want a little bit of background in there. It's kind of neat if you can see through it a little bit, so I don't know, 120 is fine, whatever. Now you can kind of see through it. If there's stuff behind it in the game, you'll see it. But it allows the text to pop a little bit. Makes it a lot easier to read. Your players will appreciate you for doing that. All right, so we have our text here. Next, oh, what is this? Oh, yeah, don't worry about that. Okay, next, I'm going to make another child object to my dialog panel. And that is going to be another panel. In this panel, we're going to call the answer panel. The way I did that, by the way, is hitting F2. It works in Windows and Unity and just about every application. That's your standard rename shortcut. So just F2, and now I can rename it. Okay, so here's our answer panel, which is also a child to the dialog panel, but it's not a child to the text object in the dialog panel. They are next to each other, but not related. And that's kind of important because text is wonky. You don't really want to make anything a child of a text object, even though technically it lines up the anchors. Technically it's exactly the same. But if we have less text, uh, at runtime, it doesn't always draw the anchors where they're necessarily supposed to be at runtime. Especially after you build, you can have some issues where it's just not showing up right, or like we're gonna lock this to, we're gonna basically lock it into this corner over here, so that it looks like this, to provide our answers. Over here to give you like your answer selection, whatever. And when we do that, if our text doesn't fill this box at runtime after you build, specifically after you build, our text doesn't fill this. Like let's say it only went to like here, then it might put this answer panel like here, because that's where the end of the text object is. Actually, it would probably put it like here. It would be really weird. You just don't want that to happen. So, so what we're going to do instead is make this a child to the dialog panel specifically. Okay, now the answer panel here, we again want to use anchors. I'm looking at where this is. I kind of like where I just sort of like threw this in here. I can see the halfway point is somewhere like around here. So I'm gonna call this like 0.6 probably. So for my x, I want the min x to be like 0.6. We're gonna move that over some 0.65, 66. Yeah, 0.67. That works. And then the max x is going to be 1. Now, the minimum y, this is just a little weird, is actually going to be 1. And then the max y is going to be like 2.5. Yeah, that'll work. The reason is because we want the minimum y of this box to be the top of the dialog panel, because we want it to appear just above it. So we want that anchor to actually be on the top there. Okay, so we're going to set these to 0. We're going to see how that looks. That looks pretty snazzy. I like it. I'm a fan. If it was on Facebook, I would like it. We're going to save our scene really quick, just to be safe. On the answer panel, we're going to need a component called a vertical layout group. And what this does is, honestly, cheats. So we're going to create some buttons here. I'll just create one really quick with the UI button. We're going to make some buttons here. We're going to make 4 of them. And they're going to, I want them to lay out nicely. Like you see that by default, they made this nice little vertical line. But they're not evenly spaced. They're not really sized the way we want them to yet. But it at least puts them in a vertical layout where they're aligned and they look nice. Even though this is totally unusable right now, I'm gonna grab these and delete them, and actually do it with you. So our vertical layout group. I'll make the buttons first. Yeah, let's make a UI button. Whatever. We'll leave all 4 of them there. Right, so I want my child alignment to be the upper center. That just moves them all to be centered. And right, that's what it is. Okay, so we need to control the size of the child objects here. And the way that we do that is just checking these boxes to make sure that they fill up the full area that they're able to, right? And each one of these has a text, which I'm going to crank up the font size here. That looks pretty good. So we're probably going to go down to like a 35 again, and then up to like a 60 to make that fit as best we can. And grab these, beat them, and boom, boom, boom. Now we have our 4 answer options. Okay. Yeah, that works fine, right? Yeah, that looks good. Okay, so we've got our 4 buttons here for all of our answers. I'll go ahead and name these answer 1, answer 2, 3, and answer 4. Okay, so each one of these is just a button. If we were to play our game right now, you can see our Lorem Ipsum, and we have some buttons. You can click them. Cool. Awesome, right? Okay. So that is the basic of setting up our UI. I'll go ahead while we're in here. I'm gonna need this anyway. So I'm gonna make another panel here that's just a child to the canvas. You can see it's separate from the dialog panel. I'm gonna call this the inventory panel because we're gonna need this later. But I want to go ahead and have it in here just to do it. The other thing I'm going to do is something a little cooler than I like. You make a vertical layout group in your inventory panel, and then the child of that, you make another panel called horizontal inventory line 1, I suppose. It's one way to do it. And then on this, I'm going to add a horizontal layout group. I know this seems really weird right now, but give it a minute here. And then for inventory objects, it really depends on your game, how you want to set them up. I have some games where it's just simply an image that shows you, hey, here's your inventory. And then if you have items, then the game will react accordingly. I have other games where you open up an inventory and you want to toggle items, and when you toggle them, you want to see a description, or maybe they're buttons, and you can see a description and equip them, or give them away, or drop them, or see details, whatever. Every game is different, but for this, I'm just going to make them buttons, because that's what I did in the original. So, yeah, here's like 6 buttons. And in here, we're going to control the size of the children. In the center. And that didn't work at all. Why did that not work at all? I'm very confused. Alright, for this one, is that, yeah, there we go. Alright, we're gonna make like 3 rows here. Each one's got 6, so we've got 18 buttons. Cool. I'm gonna go ahead and do this. Control the child size, and then I'm gonna add some more spacing between them so that they look nice. Well, I'm gonna say like 30. 30 will be fine. And then I want some padding on the top, probably another 30. And then this one, the bottom's gonna be 15. And then look at this again. Oh, and look at that. Isn't that so nice? No, it's not. I'm going to change the top spacing to 15 on each of these. That way, it's a nice even Steven box everywhere you look. Ugh. Middle row is bigger. Ignore it, I'm a perfectionist. Alright, so we're going to go ahead and disable that for now. I just wanted to show you kind of a little bit about how you set up vertical and horizontal layout groups and just how simple that can be. I mean, that took, what, 30 seconds, a minute? And look at how pretty that is. If I wanted, I could make this, like half the screen, not that one. You can make it like half the screen and then smash it all over here and then fix the proportions a little bit. And you have yourself an inventory panel, and then you can print descriptions over here just by clicking on these. I mean, inventory and UI is really, really simple as soon as you learn the basics and you set things up properly. If you just drag these around, you will sit here for days getting them all lined up perfectly to the right pixels and all looking nice, and then you'll build it and you'll play it in the window and it'll all look like garbage and you won't be able to read it or see it and it'll be awful. So don't do that. Just set it up right. It takes half as much time and it looks awesome. So, Simple Tricks 101. Alright, we're going to go ahead and save the scene. Now I have my UI set up, and I don't know where we're at here for time. Yeah, we're getting down there. So I'm going to go ahead and break it off again. We got our dialog panel set up. We got our canvas set up. In the next tutorial, we're going to look at making a basic player. We're going to look at making the NPC with the... nope, I lied. In our next video, we're going to look at the state machine, and we're going to look at state machine controls, state machine scripts. We're going to look at how to implement dialogue, how to reference this panel, and how to set up a manager so that we don't have to directly reference the panel every time. We're going to set up one dialogue manager, and then we're going to reference it. We're going to set up some public functions and variables so that we only have to reference it from each state. We only have to reference the one thing, and we'll make it all work nicely for you. So stay tuned.